In 1975, Japanese mountaineer Junko Tabei became the first woman in the world to climb to the summit of Mount Everest. Over the past 50 years, approximately 900 women have followed in her footsteps, defying cultural and physical barriers to reach the top of the world. My name is Tori James. I am the first Welsh woman to climb Mount Everest, and I'm on a mission to shine a spotlight on this little known but incredible woman and celebrate this 50th anniversary milestone by sharing stories from women around the globe who have also reached the summit of the world's highest peak. Welcome to the First Females podcast, Croeso, as we say in Wales. Today I am joined by Polly Murray, who in the year 2000 became the first Scottish woman to reach the summit of Everest, aged 26. Polly also holds the record for the first joint Telemark Ski descent of McKinley via the rescue gully. That's also known as Denali, which is in Alaska, the highest peak in North America. She is a qualified ski instructor and has represented the UK in Nordic skiing and completed a ski traverse of Bylot Island in northern Canada. Polly lives in Scotland. She is married and she's a mum to 2 boys. Polly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tori. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I knew of your name back in 2006 and 2007 when I was just thinking about climbing Everest myself. So it's really wonderful to meet you today and to be talking to you. I don't really want to make it sound like we're getting old, but 25 years ago, since you climbed Everest, does it feel a long time ago? And I mean, how often does it feature in your life at the minute?
I'd like to still think I'm nice and young, but Tori, yeah, I'm not. Sadly, I hit the big 50 last year. So yes, 25 years, but it's flown by. Um, and yeah, Everest is still, very much there. Not every day in my mind, but I do think about it for sure. But yes, time is flying.
So can you take us back to the start really and tell me a little bit about what got you into the outdoors in the first place and maybe your first taste of climbing and mountaineering?
Yeah, so I am Scottish, believe it or not, with this accent. My mum was actually English and my dad was very Scottish, but they separated when I was quite young and my mum remarried another English man. But we've always lived in Scotland and home is definitely here. And that's really where my adventures have started. I think, honestly, from as far back as I can remember, I was kicked out the house, or that's where I wanted to be, outside. And as a small child, I just didn't, I didn't really like being inside. I was just out there playing, climbing trees, just doing what kids should do, really. And my parents were very encouraging of that. My mum and dad were both artists, and um, my stepfather, when he came along, he was a Royal Marine, so he was quite a sort of um, hardcore kind of outdoor character. And yeah, mum was brilliant. She brought us up for a while by herself, and we went on camper van trips to try and sell her glass. In fact, we went once around Europe in the camper van, and I think mum just encouraged us to do stuff. And we didn't have masses of money, but we were always in the hills. My first hill was Schiehallion, and I went up there when I was 5 years old with my brother and my mum. And I think she persuaded us with jam tarts most of the way up. So it was always part of my life, just being outside. And obviously back in the early 70s, we had lots of snow then. So we had little cross country skis and we would always be padding around in the garden in the winter times. And when my stepdad came along, it was more adventurous. We'd go up into the bigger hills up at Glen Shee. And I think I remember even aged about 7 having to skin up from from the road all the way up to the top of the Tiger Lift, which is like the highest point, well, one of them where the lifts go at Glen Shee. So no lifts, just skin up to the top. And I had these little like wooden skis with no edges and got to the top, and it was blowing a, normal hoolie at the top of the hill. And I was light as a feather, and my mum was a bit nervous because she thought, oh God, I'm going to get blown down the mountain. But literally put me between her knees, her legs, and got me off the summit, sheet ice, and then happy days, just skied the rest by myself. So I think, we were adventurous. My parents were really encouraging. We would have kind of competitions with my brothers who could climb up the side of the railway bridge. There was an old disused railway bridge down by the river where we lived. And my stepdad used to say, oh, I'll give you 50p if you can climb up the side here. And, if we'd fallen, we would have died. But they didn't care. Like, honestly, they just let us go. And I think that for me was kind of the grounding to sort of what came later, really.
Mm.
I was a tomboy, ultimately.
I was going to say, did you have an awareness as to whether there were any stereotypes at that stage for what girls should or shouldn't do, or boys should or shouldn't be?
No, not really. I mean, I have a brother. I have two stepbrothers, and later in life, I got another half brother and half sister. So it was quite male dominated. Um, but I think from day one, I was just, I was, I say male dominated. What does it matter? But I suppose quite often people think, oh, the girls should be inside, doing sort of dolls and stuff, and the boys should be outside climbing the trees. It was a little bit like that in our day. Um, but no, I was always the one who was outside and, you know, climbing the trees more than my brother. But, you know, I didn't want to wear dresses. I knew that. I didn't like getting dressed up, or, makeup didn't come in the equation. So, but I am very feminine, don't get me wrong. um, but yeah, I just love the adventure and, you know, just being out there doing, you know.
And so, mountaineering then, you were growing up in Scotland, so you obviously had some incredible mountains to climb. Tell us about, that journey from, I guess, climbing in Scotland to getting to Everest, or even the idea of
Yeah.
Everest.
So climbing was always a big part of my life. Mountains were always a big part because my stepfather was actually a climber. He was in the Royal Marines, and he did a lot of mountains. So I'd always heard or seen photos of what he'd done. And I guess, coming into teenage years, we went on camping trips, and we went over to France a couple of times and got into the bigger mountains. And they would sort of say to my parents would say to all of us kids, right, we're going to go and climb, the some mountain in the Dauphiné. Um, and we'd be like, "Ugh," to be honest, I would be like 13 and actually not that interested in doing it, which sounds awful because I'd probably met some boys at the campsite and didn't want to leave the campsite because I thought that would be more fun. And I remember my mum getting quite cross with me, just saying, like, Polly, you need to come. You need to come. I think it was called the Ratu, the first sort of biggish hill mountain. And she said, you need to come and climb this. Oh, so okay. Ugh, dragged me, which is a bit kind of spoily. But oh my God, as soon as I was up there, just my whole everything changed. The whole kind of I felt alive. I loved it. And of course, you get to the top and you've got crampons on. I mean, we had terrible gear. We had like ropes around our waists. It was all a bit sort of Heath Robinson, but that was the way we were back then. Um, but that feeling of getting to the top of the mountain, oh, I was on fire. I was in my element. So I think it was clear, that for me was a huge plus, a huge passion. Whereas one of my brothers just not that interested. And that's just maybe the way he was, and didn't
Mm.
pursue a career or a lifestyle like I did. So that opened my eyes really to the bigger mountains. Um, and I did a French exchange to Chamonix, and the exchange's cousins were all doing Mont Blanc. And I was so jealous. But I was 15 and they were like, they probably thought, "Oh, not taking this little Scottish girl up Mont Blanc. She probably can't, survive up there." But I remember being really quite jealous inside, thinking, "Oh, I really wish I could go." Um,
Mm.
so yes, it was definitely there. But yeah.
And were there, obviously your family was a huge encouragement to this, but were there any sort of other role models who were already mountaineers in their own right who inspired you to do more?
Yes, definitely later on. Definitely later on. But you see, I will go back again and say that my main thing was skiing. So as a little girl, my main thing was passion was skiing. I
Hmm.
just, again, in Scotland, we had snow back then, and mum very kindly would take us up to Glenshee whenever we could. And so skiing became the big part of my life. And
Hmm.
actually, when I left school, I ended up racing, competing, and then I thought that's too much like hard work. I don't want to be in this industry. I don't want to. I don't want to put all my eggs into one basket. It's far too much like hard work, training all the time. I wanted to have fun. I was 19, 20. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to, you know, do other things. So
Hmm.
I ended up racing, and then I ended up in Norway. And it was when I got to Norway and I thought, gosh, why don't I get some qualifications? So I got qualifications in teaching skiing. And then from there, I was able to actually earn money, which, my mates would be at university. So I got my first job in Andorra teaching skiing. And all my mates were at uni and we were sort of in touch. And, I was making good money and having lots of fun. So really, the skiing was almost bigger than the climbing
Hmm.
in that respect. Um, but then I got into ski touring,
Hmm.
and then you see sort of more of the mountains away from the slopes, away from the people. And that to me was really appealing. So from there, it sort of grew arms and legs, and I ended up getting a job in Chamonix, which again, the big mountains are there. And then there's lots of people around into ski touring, into climbing. And that's when I really got back into the climbing side of things. Although as a child, I'd always rock climbed, on and off on little crags and really enjoyed it. It wasn't till a lot later that the sort of the big mountains and wanting to sort of get away from people and, explore basically more remote places. And that's when well, I met lots of people, but one particular guy called John Barry, who actually was a mate of my stepdad's. And I'd met him when I was about 19, 20. And he invited me to join him on a trip to India, to northern India, to climb some
Hmm.
horrific mountain. I'm not quite sure why he invited me, but I went. And we obviously didn't get up to the top because it was just unclimbable. But he was a bit of a legend, and he was my sort of, yeah, he was really, I aspired to him. and and that's sort of, well, lots of things happened, lots of mountains were climbed, and I never thought I would go to Everest because it just seemed such a huge thing, and a, a thing that I, well, how am I going to get to Everest? But again, my stepdad in 88 led an expedition to Everest. So he led a joint services expedition. So it was in my radar. And then when I left school in 92, there was another expedition there. He didn't get to the summit, not that that mattered. But in 92, they went to try again a joint services. But he wasn't involved on the mountain this time. He was involved with the logistics. And part of a perk for him is he got two of his children were able to go to base camp. So when I left school, age 17, one of my stepbrothers and my mum and my stepdad flew to Kathmandu. I got really sick and had to catch them up on the trek up to base camp. But I was quite fit at 17 and literally, caught them up, trekked in with them, met Sherpas, couldn't believe how amazing they were, basically played baseball at every stop we had with them, just having fun. Beautiful place. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. Got to Everest Base Camp. And because we were sort of part of the team, we weren't, but my stepdad was, we were able to spend a night at base camp. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got a bit of a headache. And obviously it's altitude sickness a little bit. And we got given these huge, like, pink pills. Oh, I'll just take one of them, you'll be fine. It was just a Nurofen or something. And then I remember having a really good night's sleep. And then the next day, walking up to the start of the icefall and standing next to two guys. No, one guy. He was called Bronco Lane. And he was on a trip on Everest. And I looked at his feet and I thought, God, he's got really small feet. And he said, oh, yeah, I got frostbite on both my feet, both my toes, all my toes were amputated. I was like, oh, okay. And that happened on Everest. But I just remember standing with him up there thinking, this is just magic, absolutely magic. But never even an inkling that I would ever be there again. Not even,
And
well,
you weren't deterred by the toes, the mention of the toes.
the toes. No, do you know, that was just exciting. Um, well, yeah, in a funny sort of way. No, not at all. God, no. But not even thinking, wow, in 8 years' time, I might actually be here on an expedition myself. So, how that expedition happened, I will honestly, it literally a year before I went to Everest, I was at a wedding, a mutual friend's wedding, and a guy came up to me and he was called Chris Tyso. And we got chatting and he said, I'm sponsoring a British expedition to Everest next year. And I was like, wow, okay. Didn't know him from Adam. He knew a friend of mine. And he said, we're a really small team and we're needing a guide, basically. So anyway, cut a long story short, John Barry, who was a friend of my stepfather's, had been on Everest before, didn't particularly want to go back because he'd had a bit of a disaster there with a friend of his, and has said, nah, I'm never going to go back to Everest. And then he got whiff of this expedition and he said, do you know what? I think I could lead an expedition up there. And he said, can I take Polly? And basically, I ended up going on this trip. And it was a really small team of people. We were 7 climbers. And literally, I was still working in Chamonix. I did a winter in Chamonix. And I left the winter a month early to join the trip in Kathmandu. And
And what was that feeling like when you committed, when you said, I'm in, I'm going to be.
just super, super exciting. Super exciting. I didn't have much time to think about it. For me, it was just another mountain, but a little bit bigger and a little bit more special. But how lucky am I? How
Mm,
lucky am I? Um,
talk about being in the right place at the
a-
right time.
absolutely. And because it was a non-commercial expedition, the finances were doable. Um, and I feel really bad saying this, but I didn't pay massive amounts of money to go there. Taizo took full sponsorship,
Mhm.
very, very kindly. I did very little of the organisation because it was pretty much all done, and by mainly a guy called Gavin Bate, who had organised it really. Um, so for me, it was an absolute, I mean, it was like a lottery. I'd won the lottery, um, being able to join this trip with, in fact, three people I knew incredibly well because the guy I skied off McKinley with is a great friend, Andy Salter, and he was on that trip as well because he then went on to do the seven summits of the seven
Hmm.
continents. So that was the whole
Hmm.
idea, was to do the seven summits. But in
Hmm.
fact, I only did Everest. I didn't
Hmm.
go on to do all the seven summits. I don't know why, but I didn't. So it was just
And
a really lovely, really lovely trip.
and how I assume
Hmm.
you were aware at the time that you would become the first Scottish woman to reach the summit of Everest. How much of a motivation was that for you in the attempt?
To be honest, I had no idea really who'd climbed Everest at that point. So when I said yes to it, it wasn't even on my radar. And I honestly
Hmm.
can say that. Oh, it just wasn't. I knew Rebecca Stevens had been up, obviously,
Hmm.
and I'd heard all about her. I'd actually met her and was, very, very impressed with what she'd done. And um, Jeanette
And that was in,
Harrison.
oh
Uh,
yeah.
so I met Rebecca in Chamonix. She came out to Chamonix a few times, so I'd met her um, probably only once or twice. And then Jeanette Harrison and Alison Hargreaves had both climbed it, but I think I'm not sure if Alison had died by then. I can't remember. And Jeanette also sadly had passed. So I didn't have them to chat to. I'd spoken to Rebecca. No, I don't think I even had spoken to Rebecca because I didn't know I was going. So it was really weird when I summited and came back down. Um, at base camp, they said, "Oh, there's a few emails coming in. You're the first Scottish woman," and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." You know, wow, that's quite great, brilliant.
So it's the 50th anniversary of the first female ascent of Everest. Why do you think it's important to celebrate this 50th anniversary milestone?
I think it's wonderful that we're celebrating this 50th anniversary of summiting Everest by a female, Jungo Tabai. It's, I think back in those days, not so common for a female to be climbing, full stop. So I absolutely take my hat off because all those logistics and organization must have been, full on hard graft. Um, it makes me sound old, but I'm quite proud that I'm 25 years. So 25 years later, I climbed Everest. And what's wonderful is my summit day was the 16th of May, which was exactly the same as Jimka's. So that's cool.
So special.
Yeah.
Oh wow, what a connection to have.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's great.
So the climb then,
Mm,
Polly, for
yeah.
you, what how do you describe your experience of being on Everest in the year 2000?
So thankfully, because I'd been working for several years i- at altitude in Chamonix, I was pretty fit. I was 26 at my prime. So as far as training is concerned, I really didn't need to because it was what I was doing. That was my lifestyle at the time. I was ski touring at altitude. I mean, I was fit and healthy. Um, the the mountain was extraordinary. The thought of going up and down a mountain kind of baffled me a wee bit, but now I understand why we do that. Um, you know, we were blessed. We were blessed in many, many ways. We were blessed because it was 2000. There were lots of people, but not too many. So I think, unlike, you know, now, the summit ridge was just us.
Hmm.
which is unbelievable. Um, the summit day, we had a few other parties come to summit that day. We had a couple of really bad storms on the summit day, and a couple of the teams went back down. Um, we had some ferocious weather prior to that going up to camp 3 on the Lhotse face. But, we didn't get too affected by it. One of our tents disappeared, well, was shredded completely. But we came back down. I had a really bad chest infection at one point, and I took anti-saltazine antibiotics, which were amoxicillin. I didn't realize at the time I was allergic to penicillin. So I had a massive reaction,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was literally like I'd been attacked by a cheese grater. My face was in bits. And obviously, with the strong sunshine, it was just horrendous. But
Mm.
timing wise, we'd kind of done all the depositing food and tents, and we were on that rest phase waiting for kind of the weather window. And we actually went all the way back down to almost smelling the rhododendrons. And actually, I got better in that time. And then with our weather window, I was fit and healthy again. So I have to say, we didn't have any major dramas. Um, and yes, it was tough. Of course, it was tough. But you know what? When you're 26 and fit as a fiddle, you kind of don't really look into all of that. But we were
So
lucky.
were
We
there
were lucky.
were there any times of self-doubt for you, or how did you mentally approach the climb?
Do you know, Tori, I don't think too deep into too many things. And I certainly didn't then. I think I probably do now. And I would,
Mhm.
yeah. But back then, I was just happy go lucky. Honest to God, I think the group was such, I had such good mates on the team.
Mhm.
We made it, we made it kind of, we made it fun, whatever the
Mhm.
circumstances. Even in the brutal storm when I had horrific, dare I say this, after the antibiotics and illness, horrific constipation. You know, I got to camp 3 and one of the tents had disappeared. So we were all huddled in one tent, and all I needed to do was go to the loo. That's all I wanted to do. And I remember it took me blimmin' ages to get out the
Oh.
tent because obviously I'm with blokes, 4 blokes, and I need to go. And so there was a bit of our other tent left, and I thought, well, if I go in there, at least I've got a bit of privacy. Oh, geez. Well, you can imagine this, Tori, because you've been there. Like in a storm on the Lhotse face, sheet ice, you get out the tent, you can't just wander around because you're on a very, very steep mountainside. You have to put your crampons on. And literally trying to put my crampons on. Oh, need the loo. And then I remember Chris Tizo saying, look, here's a shovel. Do it on that. Oh my goodness. Anyway, and too much detail, but like really that was challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to cry, but you just have to laugh. You
Yes.
you just have to turn it
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. And like as a female, what we have to put up with our, various things going on.
It's
Um,
definitely not as easy to go to the loo, and
no.
yeah, if you're having to deal with periods at
Yeah.
different places on the mountain, yeah,
It's
it's but
but you deal with it. I mean, I got to the South Summit, and like you, we all have these funnels, don't we? If we need a pee, we use a funnel, and it's hilarious because you just unzip and go like a man, and then you turn around and someone sees the waft of blonde hair and is like, "Oh," or long blonde hair, like, but that's a woman standing up peeing. But but it makes life easy. But then, yeah, the sad summer, I realized I had my monthly. Oh my God. Like how inconvenienced that. I mean,
mm,
I was prepared, but you know, so little things like that. But again, it's the
And you
way it
do what
is.
you said then, you do just deal with it. People often, ask, how do you cope? And in some ways, it's the least of your worries. You're looking at what the weather's doing, you're checking in on yourself, you're making sure you're not getting too cold. Oh, right, I've got to deal with my period as
Mhm.
well. Okay.
Mm.
So, I mean, I want to know what your summit experience was like. Did you
Mhm.
do anything to celebrate up there? What were the thoughts going through your head when you reached the top?
Yeah. So, like I said before, that summit ridge for me was so special. Um, I took a photo, and it was literally John, a Sherpa, me, Andy, or and we had two Sherpas, sorry, and three of us who summited. So five of us, and no one else on that ridge. And it was so beautiful. The weather had cleared, we'd had storms, um, and we sort of, like you guys, probably you get to that sad summit and it's a commitment because you're on that final ridge. And you know, if the weather changes or something goes wrong, that, the consequences are quite high. The risk is quite high. But we knew that everyone was feeling good. The weather was kind of holding. It was still early enough to get to the summit and back to the South Col. And I think at that moment, when I dealt with what was going on the female side, um, climbing up, it was just, yeah, surreal, special, whatever. And that last over the Hillary step, that last wave, the cornices was just, I knew at that point I was going to stand on the summit. And actually, it was a weird feeling because I was like, probably the first time I'd ever really thought, wow, I might actually be standing at the top of the world in a minute. But that summit ridge went on forever and ever and ever. Um, and when we got to the summit, the weather completely came in. But happy days, we were on the summit. And we had, I don't know, 5 minutes probably on the summit. Don't know. Can you
Mhm.
remember? People ask you, don't they? How long were you on the summit for?
Yeah,
I'm like, oh God,
I
I don't
spent
know.
longer than most. I
Did you?
was on the summit for almost 40 minutes, 40
Okay.
minutes.
Okay, that's impressive. I think then my 5 minutes, I probably was more like 20, actually, when I think
Mm.
about it. But not long because we knew the weather had turned. But first thing I wanted obviously was a photo. Well, hey, we're on the summit. Um, so yeah, we took our masks off and got some photos. And I'd taken famous grouse whiskey with me because my uncle worked for famous grouse. So we'd taken little miniatures, and I had a little miniature at the top. I didn't drink it, obviously, but I had that at the top. Didn't drink it. No, I thought that would be a little bit too much. Um, and normally I like to do like a handstand at the top of the mountain. It's kind of my thing. Every mountain I do a handstand, and I remember thinking, shall I do one? And I thought, nah, I'm not going to actually. Not. I think I've got this far. Imagine how stupid that would look if I slipped. Because it's not big, is it? The area at the
No,
summit. No, it's
that's what I'm thinking.
tiny.
I mean, if that goes wrong
Exactly. So I was
and you haven't got an
sensible.
ice axe in your hand,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
Good achievement.
yeah. So cherish that moment. It was wonderful. But like you guys, priority is to get down safe, and that's what we did. And actually, Andy Salter, when we got back down to the South Col, he wasn't great. He'd really struggled with his back and with altitude, and we had very low. Um, we hardly had any oxygen left at that point. Um, in fact, I'd run out by the time we'd got to down to the bottom. So we were sort of sharing each other's. And I remember John saying to me, because he'd been up there before at the South Col with another mutual friend who'd not been great, who actually almost died. He had bad snow blindness. And I remember John saying to me, Polly, the next, well, obviously we got to South Col, had a wee kip for not that long. And then John just said, look, we need to get off this mountain. And I felt good. And he just said, Paul, you need to get down. Go. I'd rather you live, you know, than all of us die. Because he really was worried about Andy. He said, I'm going to look after
Mhm.
Andy. Want you to get down to the next camp and get a brew on, basically, for when we arrive. And I remember just going back down um as quickly as I could down and getting the stove on for Andy and John to appear. And obviously the more, we descended, the better Andy felt. But he
Mm.
wasn't good. He wasn't good.
Mm. It's horrible, that touch and
You
go, that
know,
that fine
yeah,
line between being okay and not
yeah,
okay.
no, it was I think quite scary for him. Um
Mm.
and then obviously, yeah, through the ice fall, I was getting more and more excited about just getting back down to base camp, and then you have that lovely feeling. But you're never safe until you're, well, right down there, are you? You've just got to keep your wits.
I remember then flying in a small helicopter from Namche Bazaar to the outskirts of Kathmandu, having been to the summit and got back down safely from the summit, and
Hmm.
thinking, well, this would be ironic now if something happens. And
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
how do you? I mean, there are risks with going into the mountains. How do you view those risks? How would you describe your attitude to risks and the outdoors, and what exists out there?
Um, so again, back then, I took loads of risks. I think my whole life was doing crazy things in lots of different ways. Um, and that has changed now since obviously kids and just growing up a bit more, realizing
Mhm,
the
mhm,
consequences, people I've lost through, climbing, skiing, accidents, wherever. I think a lot more now, and that's only in the last 10 years. So
mm,
before that, I was happy to take risks
mhm,
because uh, because it was exciting, and loved what I've done and what I was doing, and yeah, the thrill of it all is just, I couldn't get enough of it. But I think when you do start losing people, the reality kicks in. But
mm,
it's only just kicked in the last,
mm,
I would say, in the last 15 years, really, and that's since children. And I've done a couple of trips, since kids were born. And yeah, you certainly do think a lot more about it. And I also think, God, what I did in the past. Oh, how many bullets have I dodged in various different trips I've done? And it is unbelievable.
Are there any that spring to mind?
I crossed an island in the Arctic with Tash, my great mate, and we were two girls on an island, in northern Canada, the one just below the Northwest Passage. You could not be more remote. On a glacier, um, doing a traverse north to south with polar bears. Polar bears live on Bylot Island. At the time, I don't think we realised how many. They tend to stay on the exterior of the island because that's where the food is, the seals and whatever they eat. But we were doing a traverse, and it was just me and my pal. And we were on skis, we were towing sledges. We did have a rifle in case a polar bear did appear, which unbelievably it didn't. When we stepped foot on the island, the first thing we saw were polar bear paw prints. You could almost like smell them in the air. But for some reason, they never found us. We either must have really stank badly or not, or we were just lucky. But the most terrifying, probably, part of that trip was navigating crevasses.
Mm,
They were blooming everywhere, and huge glacial rivers. and we had sort of 6 days to cross the island. And then the boat was due to come and pick us up from the south side. We had no communication. We had a handheld radio, line of sight, no EPIRB, no sat phone, like nothing. The crevasses were huge. The only reason I think we're still here is we had amazing weather, and it was 24-hour daylight. The minute or the day after we got rescued, sort of when I say rescued, after we got picked up on the south side, we spent actually 2 days waiting for the boat because it couldn't come in because of the ice. But when it eventually did pick us up, we sailed back across to Canada, which was like the nearest civilization to this little place called Pond Inlet. And when you look back on Bylot, the whole mountain was just covered in snow. I mean, it was already covered in snow, but the blizzards had come in. It's my birthday, August the 18th, and the storms came in. So if we had been a week later, what I'm trying to say
Mhm.
is how the heck would we have navigated? Like, compasses didn't work because we were 60, like 2 degrees north. Nothing
Yeah.
worked. And, I'm not a brilliant, navigator as it is, but we could see everything. We're just like, oh, we just go through that way.
Whose
So
idea was it, Polly?
it was, it was a little mix of both of us. Credit, I would say, goes to Tash because in Chamonix, she does lots of reading. And she was reading about these explorers back in the 60s, Tillman and Shipton.
Mhm.
And they had crossed Bylot or tried to. And they'd had an absolute epic. Um, and anyway, she passed me like this article that they'd written in this book. And she said, Polly, look, I know a guy who lives on the west coast of Scotland and he's got a little boat and he goes to Greenland every year. Um, do you think he might take us on his boat? And anyway, we did a lot of talking and a lot of, sort of putting our heads together. And we got in touch with this guy, Bob Shepton. And we said to Bob, I think we emailed him just to say, would you be up for taking two girls on a trip? And we weren't sure what we'd been able to do. And he was like, absolutely, absolutely. And he had, looked at Bylot Island to cross. And he said, well, why don't you cross Bylot? And he actually, and another guy, Maxie, crossed the other side of the island. So we had two crewing the boat, and they dropped Tash and I at one end, Bob and Maxie at the other end, and we both did our individual traverses.
Amazing.
I know. So yes, it was a bit of a mishmash. Tash, is an amazing sailor. I'd kind of done a bit as a kid, but not big yachts. Well, it wasn't a big yacht. It was actually a 33-foot westerly that's made of fiberglass, so not designed to go in Arctic waters. But she had all that knowledge. She was obviously a skier like myself. I probably had a little bit more knowledge in the crevasses and that sort of mountain and ropey stuff. Um, but we're best mates. The two of us have done so many things together that we're a really good team. Um, and I think, we have a laugh. That's the main thing. And if it had been horrific and shit had hit the fan, like really hit it, I just think we would have coped because we're such good pals. Um, but yeah, I look back on that trip and I do think, those blooming crevasses. I mean, there were times you put your ski pole down, as you probably know, it looks solid and it would just disappear under you.
Mm.
Um, that was stressful. That was stressful, and I don't know how we got through or navigated through the last glacier because it was terrifying. It was just crevasses everywhere.
And your adventures have been worldwide, I know, with friends, but also working as a presenter for a BBC children's survival series, which I think was called Serious.
It's
What can
serious.
you what can you Tell us about that.
Well, all I can say is just, again, lucky, lucky, lucky. Um, I am not a presenter. So, yeah, I am not a presenter. But I think thanks to Everest, um, I was asked to do like a talk in London. I can't even remember where it was. And I went and did it. And a friend came or happened to be there with a guy, and they heard me. And this guy who I didn't know said to this friend of mine, Heidi, I'm looking for a female presenter to help me on this program called Sirius. Do you think Polly would be up for it? Like, she sort of does a bit of this. She can climb, she can use ropes, and she can live in the wilds. And Heidi said, well, I don't know, ask her. So at the end of the talk, he came up, we had a chat, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. So it was basically a program called Sirius. Well, the first one was Sirius Amazon, Sirius Andes, Sirius Ocean. Then it went to Sirius Explorers, following in the footsteps of, and we did Marco Polo, Sir Walter Raleigh, and David Livingstone.
But no women.
So my job was basically to be, I say presenter, inverted commas, but it was to be mum, to look after. The main part of this show were the kids. So we took 8 children aged between 12 and 16, 4 boys, 4 girls, all walks of life, little mix match, because for television you can't just have 8 able, keen adventurers, expedition people. You had to have, you had to have a little bit of variety. So 4 boys, 4 girls, young, I mean, really young, 12-year-olds. They would come and they would join us for a month and be filmed living in the wilds wherever we went. So the first one was the Amazon. Now, I'd never been to the jungle before in my life. Horrific. Oh my goodness, I was terrible. I wasn't terrible, but I wasn't a great presenter, I didn't think, because I didn't know what to do. There was no script. Well, there was no script, which was great. But I was just a bit like oh my God, I've got all these cameras on me. But actually, what I didn't realize is you just go with the flow. You're just living, you're just looking after the kids, you're just doing, all these various things. So what we did was we built a monkey enclosure on that trip. We did journeys through the jungle. We slept out. They were some of the hardest trips I've ever done. We went the next trip. I actually didn't think I was going to get a job on the next program because I didn't think I was very good in front of the camera. But actually, they gave me, bless them, the benefit of the doubt. And I did the next trip, which was to the Andes, which was living up in the high Paramo with gauchos on horseback, camping. There were no hotels, nothing, not even for the crew. I mean, proper, like really hard trips. We climbed Cotopaxi, which was, don't quote me, 20,000 feet. We got a 12-year-old.
Hi.
We probably got 4 of the kids to the top of that. We were riding these wild horses everywhere, camping out with them, living with the gauchos, building bear enclosures for spectacle bears that we took out of captivity and were basically releasing into the wilds. We went to Africa. We did an African trip where we sailed, for miles down the coast. Again, living in the wilds, doing tagging lions. We sailed around Cape Horn on one of the trips, kayaking down the fjords, working with albatross, tagging elephant seals. We went to Guyana, we went to China. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But for me, what an experience. I was able to witness the lives of however many children I took living completely out of their comfort zone. Some of them had never been out of their hometowns, to suddenly putting them in the wilds, living off the land and surviving. And they were bloomin' amazing. Like heroes, heroines, unbelievable. strong. You know, it was hard at times, really hard. Hard for us as crew, but for them, you know, not easy. And I have to say, you know, we Africa was our last trip, I think. It wasn't actually. It was our second from last trip. And one of the guys who was basically our head guide as such on that trip, who'd been brought up in he was born in the UK, been in the British Army, had lived in the Oman, but was living in Africa doing, you know, all sorts of amazing things. He was our main fixer, main guy, main guide, the most incredible guy, a great friend. On that trip, half of them went off to climb over the Umberiko mountain range. I actually was with the other half down living with the Maasai, building an enclosure for the lions. And we got a radio call about 4 days into it, right at the end of the trip, saying there's been an accident. An elephant, a bull in must, has basically come out of nowhere, has charged. Anton got his rifle up, fired a warning shot, which would normally deter the elephant. But the elephant just came straight for him and basically just pinned him down, crushed him. Um, and we obviously had medics with them up there, but they were so remote. And Anton sadly passed. And, you know, whew, on,
Mm.
on just unbelievable because you're on a BBC trip. You know, you think, you kind of think you're safe. Why? Why do you think you're safe? Of course you're not blooming safe. No one's safe. You know, there are always risks because of what we do on whatever trip, whether it be Everest, whether it be skiing off McKinley, the Arctic. There's always risks. You kind of don't expect it to happen on a BBC program trip with kids, and it did happen.
Mhm.
That opened my eyes. You know, we lost a very, 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 very good guy. Um, he he was an absolute gem. He was very special, very special.
God.
So yeah.
Yeah, so
So
sorry to hear about
no,
that.
very sad, very sad. But you know what it's like. You probably lost people as well. It's weird, hey?
Yeah. And yeah, I guess it's balancing, weighing up the benefits and the
Mm.
risks. And I certainly maintain that the benefits of doing things in the outdoors outweigh the risks. And that, I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know, has um, your experiences in these places and with other children influenced the way that you've brought up and are bringing up your own children?
Um, yeah. So when my boys arrived, I guess I wanted to sort of simulate what my folks had done to me in giving me the opportunity and showing me this other world, you know, of adventure and outdoors. And I've tried to sort of take the boys out doing everything I do. I'm really into mountain biking because obviously I can't ski that much now in Scotland. Um, so you know, yes, the boys do that. They ski. We do ski in Scotland. You know, I work up at Glenshee when there's snow, which is less and less as the days go on, the years go by. So, you know, I'm teaching them what you know I've been taught and more. You know, we have locks, we've got paddle boards, we love kayaking. My little one and dad, you know, have done a couple of really lovely kayak trips out on the west coast.
And is there an adventure that you haven't had yet in Scotland or in the rest of the UK that you'd like to have? Do you have a bucket list?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of things that I'd love to do. Obviously now with children and sort of on that kind of, you know, picking them up from school every day, it's harder to take longer days away, trips away. But we do like little mini trips, and I mean, the adventures in Scotland are, oh, you could go on forever if you get the weather. Certainly for the mountain biking, you know, I'll take the wee one. The big one's not so much into it. He's becoming a teenager and getting a bit lazy. But the wee one's still very enthusiastic. So yeah, like a 3-day trip across, the Cairngorm Loop, or we're hoping to go up and do the Murray Triangle, which is right on the north coast, and just take the bike. And I've got, good friends with kids, and we've kind of joined forces. And I've just actually had a wee mini break to Chamonix, where I used to work, and met up with a couple of families with similar aged kids. And that's special, just, hooning around the mountain with all our kids behind us skiing. And they're all such good friends.
Oh, is there a key ingredient for a brilliant adventure, do you think? What do you look for? You're you're planning the next thing.
So it's got to be the right people. And um, I've got, I think, a nice little group of people who want to come. Obviously, it's lovely meeting new people, but the friendships I think I've made doing all this is so special. Um, and yeah, I have lots of great friends, but one friend who lives very close by, son is great mates with my son, so we do a lot together. And actually, she's really good. Like, she's always researching where to go. And actually, we've got a trip, not with the children, but we've got a trip to Slovenia in September,
Ooh,
which I'm so excited for. And it's mountain biking across the Julian Alps.
ooh,
Um,
that
but
sounds fabulous.
yeah, so for a week, which will be amazing.
Do you have any thoughts, Polly? I mean, there may be people listening thinking, I'd really like to get into any of these
Hmm.
activities that you've mentioned, but and could be at massively different stages of their lives. Do you have any advice for how people might
Yeah,
start?
yeah. So I think wherever you are, um, and whatever you want to get into, um, have a look, because there's walking clubs. If you can't necessarily find people to do things with, clubs are the best. Walking clubs. I wouldn't say there's so many ski clubs now, but whatever sport it is, kayaking, or you know, there will be other people who do it. And I would say a club is a great way. As a child, I would say our neighbour's child was all about scouts. And from scouts, go to explorers. And from there, you go on, expeditions, trips, um, grab opportunities. So I feel like in my life, you know, I've met people, lots of great people, and an opportunity comes your way, take it if you can, because it will just grow and grow and grow. And the more it grows, or whatever avenue you take, you'll meet more like-minded people, um, and you'll end up having, a lot of a lot of people to talk about, or to do these trips with. Does that kind of help? Don't know.
Mm.
Tori, you have children as well, so um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the youth organisations that I was a part of myself, so Girl Guiding,
mhm,
was the key thing that got me into camping.
yeah.
I still have my very first sleeping bag that I brought when I was a brownie for my first brownie
Oh
camp. My husband keeps saying, don't you want to throw that out? No,
no,
I need to keep this. This is special. It's one of those old, rectangular ones.
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Um, and then, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award
yeah, yeah.
as well, for really getting a taste of those unsupported
Hmm.
journeys where you are reliant on you, the people around you, and you've got to get through whatever comes your
Hmm.
way, whether it's a navigational error or the weather. um, and yeah, like you said, the groups that exist, sport specific ones, or ones for um, specifically getting women into adventure. There are loads out there, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's something I can be sharing through this podcast
Hmm.
and guests. So, Polly, thank you so much for joining me today on the First Females podcast. Absolutely brilliant to be speaking to the first Scottish woman ever to climb Mount Everest, which was back in the year
Oh no, and it was
2000.
lovely to chat, and I hope I can inspire a few people to get out there and have some fun, because it is just, getting out and just doing it if that's what you want to do.
Absolutely. Well, enjoy your biking in Slovenia. It's absolutely brilliant to hear your story and how it came about. And I sincerely hope that our paths will cross in person on a mountain somewhere in the world. I'll be going to Scotland later this year, and obviously an open invite to
Absolutely.
come to the Welsh mountains if ever you're down this way.
Oh, thank you, Tori. Well, it would be lovely to meet you, as I say, in person. So hopefully that will happen soon. And good luck with your next adventure, because you're off
Thank
soon,
you.
aren't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll be reporting back on
Oh,
Yala Peak and Nepal.
cool. Well, stay safe.
We will, we will. Thank you. So, thank you to my listeners for listening to this episode of the First Females podcast. I sincerely hope you're feeling inspired to step outside of your comfort zone, embrace the outdoors, and experience the magic of the mountains. Why not celebrate this 50th anniversary milestone by organising an adventure of your own? Get a group together, go for a walk, climb a hill, and remember to reflect on the story of Junco Tabe. I'd absolutely love to hear about what you get up to, so please do connect with me on my socials, which can all be found in the show notes. To finish, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Hugh James and Bethan Lee for all their help, expertise, and support in bringing this podcast to you. Until next time, let's honour the courage and determination of Junco and the women who have climbed before us. Dream big and climb high. Hwyl fawr. Goodbye.